This girl doesn't belong in first class. The woman's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the tranquil hum of the aircraft. Heads turned. Every eye in the cabin fixed upon a perfectly manicured woman, her wrists and neck heavy with designer jewelry, radiating an aura of unquestionable entitlement. Her finger, a polished weapon, was aimed at a bewildered teenager. The young girl, Jasmine Robinson, slowly slid her headphones down, her eyes wide with a confusion so pure it was almost painful. In her sheltered life, she had never encountered such naked hostility. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice a tremor, as the first phones began to rise, their lenses glinting like the eyes of predators, eager to capture the unfolding drama. What happened next would send a shockwave not only through the flight, but across the world, reaching millions. But before we arrive at that stunning conclusion, we must understand the players in this quiet, pressurized theater. Jasmine Robinson was a child of extraordinary wealth, but her parents had painstakingly shielded her from the harsh glare of prejudice. This was her maiden voyage flying solo, a rite of passage. Usually she traveled with family, flanked by their private security. She was flying home to Chicago from a prestigious boarding school in Connecticut, where, despite being one of the few black faces in a sea of legacy admissions, she was a top student. Across the aisle stood Stephanie Blackwood, a woman who was the living embodiment of inherited privilege. At 42, she had moved through a world that bent to her will, a world shaped by her grandmother's trust fund and her grandfather's connections. Her sense of entitlement had calcified with each passing year, hardening into a worldview where people were sorted into their proper places. The conflict ignited 30 minutes after takeoff. Stephanie returned from the lavatory and saw something that made her blood run cold. There, in seat 2A, sat a young black girl, her head bowed over what looked like an advanced economics textbook, sealed off from the world by a pair of noise-canceling headphones. Stephanie froze in the aisle, her stare a mixture of disbelief and disgust. In her mind, this was not just an inconvenience, it was a violation, an invasion of the sanctuary she believed first class to be, a space reserved for people like her. She approached Jasmine's seat with the unhurried stride of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. Standing over the girl, she cleared her throat, a loud, imperious sound meant to command immediate deference. When Jasmine, lost in her studies, didn't react, Stephanie's irritation curdled into fury. She rapped her knuckles sharply on the armrest. Jasmine looked up, pulling one earbud out with a polite smile. "Oh, I'm sorry, did you need something?" she asked, her courtesy as genuine as it was ingrained. Stephanie's voice was like ice. "Yes, I need you to gather your things and move to your proper seat in economy. There has obviously been a mistake." Jasmine blinked, her gaze dropping to her boarding pass and then back to the woman. "I'm sorry, but I don't think there's a mistake. This is seat 2A. She held up her pass, a helpful gesture, as if she truly believed this was a simple mix-up. "Listen, sweetheart," Stephanie said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I don't know how you got that ticket, but this section is for passengers who have paid the appropriate fare. Economy is toward the back." The confusion on Jasmine's face was heartbreaking. Her sheltered upbringing had left her utterly unprepared for someone to challenge her very right to exist in a space. "But I do have a first-class ticket," she said softly, her voice beginning to waver. "My parents booked it for me." Stephanie let out a short, venomous laugh. "Your parents? And what is it they do that affords them first-class tickets for their children?" The question was heavy with insinuation, but Jasmine was too innocent to grasp it. She answered honestly. "My daddy works really hard. He has an important job that helps families travel safely." "I'm sure he does," Stephanie cooed with mock sympathy, "but sometimes there are charity programs or mistakes are made. Either way, you need to move." Tears began to well in Jasmine's eyes as the woman's hostility became undeniable. "I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? I can call my parents." "The only mistake," Stephanie announced, her voice rising to carry through the cabin, "is allowing children who clearly don't belong here to take seats from paying customers." Passengers were now fully engaged, their phones recording. Jasmine's eyes darted around the cabin, searching desperately for a kind face, for a single ally. It was then that a flight attendant, Lisa Patel, hurried over. Seeing a teenager in tears being berated by an adult, her instincts took over. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, placing herself protectively beside Jasmine's seat. Stephanie turned to Lisa, expecting an immediate ally in authority. "Yes," This girl is in the wrong seat. She doesn't belong here. I need you to resolve this. Lisa glanced at Jasmine's boarding pass, then at her tablet. Ma'am, this passenger has a valid first-class ticket. Everything is in order. Impossible, Stephanie snapped. Look at her. Does she look like someone who flies first class? There's an error in your system. The racism, no longer veiled, hung thick in the air. Lisa's protective stance hardened. Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat. This passenger has every right to be here. For a moment, it seemed professional authority would prevail. But Stephanie Blackwood was not a woman who accepted no for an answer. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick wad of cash. Listen, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for Jasmine to hear every word. This is clearly a computer error. I'm willing to compensate you for handling it quietly. Here's $1,000. Just fix this. Lisa stared at the money. Behind her eyes, a war was raging. Her mind screamed that this was wrong, that this child was innocent. But her heart saw rent, her mother's medication, a solution to the crushing weight of debt that kept her awake at night. From across the aisle, an elderly man in an expensive watch muttered, "Spoiled little princess doesn't even know her place." The words, weighted with a lifetime of privilege, struck Jasmine like a physical blow. Her eyes filled with tears again. I can call my parents, she offered desperately, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. She still believed this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But then, everything changed. Lisa Patel, her one defender, straightened her shoulders. The money had won. The desperate need for relief had poisoned her conscience. I'm sorry, sweetie, she said, her voice carefully neutral, her eyes refusing to meet Jasmine's. There might be a glitch with your seat after all. Let me just check the system again. The betrayal slammed into Jasmine like a physical force. Her face crumpled. But you just said, she whispered, her voice breaking. You said it was fine. The passengers, sensing the shift, smelled blood in the water. With the flight attendant now on their side, they grew bolder. Some children aren't taught proper travel etiquette, said a woman in a business suit, a smile fixed on her face. There are protocols. Her words were corporate code, a masterclass in plausible deniability. Another passenger, Derek Mitchell, had his phone out, live streaming. Black kid meltdown incoming, he whispered to his camera, framing Jasmine's trauma as content. Stephanie, sensing her victory, produced another $500. Handle this, she commanded. Lisa took the money, all $1,500, and the weight of it in her pocket felt like stone. She couldn't look at Jasmine. She couldn't face the hurt in those young eyes as she prepared to move the child from her rightful seat. Jasmine watched the transaction, a dawning horror on her face. Even in her naivety, she understood she had just been sold. I don't understand why everyone's being so mean, she whispered to herself, the question a stark indictment of every adult in the cabin. The veneer of civilization crumbled completely. Little girl needs to learn how the real world works, the elderly man, Frank, said with chilling authority. This is a valuable lesson. I never asked for special treatment, Jasmine pleaded, her words fractured by sobs. I just want to go home. But the adults were relentless, seeing not a child, but a symbol. Desperate, Jasmine tried calling her parents. Both calls went to voicemail. Unknown to her, they were in meetings, their phones silenced. The sight of the failed calls sent Stephanie into a fit of triumphant cruelty. Daddy's busy making real money, not taking charity, she sneered. Jasmine looked up, her vision blurred by tears. Charity? My family isn't poor. I don't understand. Her genuine confusion was met with derisive laughter. Lisa Patel made one last weak attempt at civility. I will get you a comfortable seat in economy, she murmured, still avoiding eye contact. That was the final blow. Jasmine's composure shattered. The tears came in a flood, her sobs echoing the heartbreak of a child discovering the world's cruelty for the first time. I just want my dad, she cried, the sound raw and desperate. What none of them knew was that their theater of cruelty was being broadcast to thousands. And in a boardroom high above Chicago, Jasmine's father was about to receive a phone call that would change everything. Justice was coming, and it would be swift, absolute, and nothing like they could ever imagine. For Derek Mitchell, this was not an ordeal. It was content. Recording the entire scene for his social media followers, he framed Jasmine's desperate texting as a new segment for his live stream. "Spoiled rich brat gets a reality check," he narrated into his camera, zooming in to capture every tear, every tremor of distress. "She's texting mommy and daddy now, probably begging them to sue the airline." His followers consumed it with glee, flooding the chat with laughing emojis and cruel remarks about entitlement. But what Derek failed to notice was the subtle shift in the comments as a growing number of viewers began to question why a cabin full of adults was tormenting a terrified child. Nearby, the flight attendant, Lisa Patel, watched the psychological dismantling unfold, and a corrosive guilt ate at her from the inside. She saw the raw terror in Jasmine's eyes, heard the bewilderment in her voice, and witnessed the methodical destruction of a child's innocence. The $1,500 in her pocket felt like a searing weight, blood money, and each of Jasmine's sobs was a fresh stab to her conscience. But she had taken the bribe. She had made her choice. Now she was trapped, a silent accomplice, unable to intervene without admitting she'd been paid to turn on an innocent girl. Bradley, the trust fund heir who had found the whole affair endlessly amusing, chimed in with his own vile assessment. Blacks shouldn't be allowed to book first class anyway. Even if they can afford it, they simply don't deserve it. The irony was breathtaking. A man who had inherited his fortune, passing judgment based on nothing but the color of a child's skin. Jasmine looked around at the hostile faces, at the adults who had appointed themselves her judge and jury, and whispered the most heartbreaking question of all. "I just don't understand what I did wrong." The innocence of those words should have silenced them. She was a child asking what crime she had committed, and the unspoken answer was nothing. Her only transgression was existing in a space where others had decided she didn't belong. As the assault continued, Jasmine sought refuge in the one place she felt safe, the thought of her father. "My daddy will understand," she said through her tears, her voice small but threaded with hope. "He always knows how to fix things." Stephanie Blackwood let loose a laugh laced with pure venom. "And what does daddy do? Run a lemonade stand?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "Let me guess, he's a very important man in his little world." She wasn't just mocking a child, she was poisoning the one source of comfort Jasmine had left. Frank, another passenger, heard something else. "Child labor laws exist for a reason," he said with mock concern. "Sounds like daddy is working his employees to the bone. Someone should probably look into that." The threat was as absurd as it was cruel, escalating the psychological warfare to an attack on her family. It was then that a new presence entered the cabin, Captain Davis. He had been monitoring the disturbance from the cockpit, and it took him only a moment to see that the situation was deeply wrong. In his long career, he had seen every kind of dispute, but never this. A lone teenager, weeping, encircled by adults who seemed to be relishing her misery. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man in command. Trapped between guilt and self-preservation, Lisa Patel avoided everyone's gaze. "There's been a seating issue," she mumbled, her voice devoid of conviction. "We're resolving it." But Captain Davis was no fool. "She seems very upset," he observed, his eyes fixed on Jasmine's tear-streaked face. "This looks like more than a seating dispute." Jasmine looked up at him, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. "I've never been treated like this," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I don't understand why they're all being so mean." The captain's expression hardened as he surveyed the smug faces and the recording phones. But before he could press further, another flight attendant appeared at his side, whispering urgently about a call from the cockpit, about VIP arrival protocols being activated. Captain Davis nodded and excused himself, but not before casting one last, searching look over the cabin. He would be back. Stephanie Blackwood watched him go with a triumphant smirk. Her lawyer must have gotten through. "Well," she announced, "it seems the proper authorities are finally taking action. This cabin is clearly not for everyone." She was certain the VIP protocol was for her, a confirmation of her status. Just then, Jasmine's phone buzzed. She looked down, and for the first time since the nightmare began, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. The message was simple. "Almost there, princess. Dad's waiting at the gate. Can't wait to hear about your flight." Reading those words, She felt a surge of strength. She looked up, and though her cheeks were still wet with tears, her voice was steady. "See, my daddy's coming to pick me up," she said, holding up her phone. "He's waiting for me." Betty, Frank's wife, let out a condescending laugh. "How sweet. Daddy to the rescue." Derek Mitchell, still filming, saw his perfect finale. "This is getting better by the minute," he told his audience. "Now we get to meet the parent who raised this entitled little princess." What none of them understood was that the VIP protocol wasn't for Stephanie. It was for Jasmine Robinson, daughter of Jonathan Robinson. And when the plane touched down, every one of them was about to face a reckoning they could never have imagined. The wheels touched down at Chicago O'Hare with a gentle thud that echoed through the first-class cabin like a promise. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived. Please remain seated as we have a special VIP disembarkation procedure. Security will be boarding momentarily to escort our VIP passenger." Stephanie Blackwood rose triumphantly, convinced her power had prevailed. "Well, it's about time," she declared, her voice ringing with vindictive satisfaction. Jasmine, meanwhile, froze in her economy seat. "Security? Are they going to arrest me?" she whispered. "Did I break a law?" She had been so battered by their cruelty that she now believed she was the criminal. Derek kept his camera rolling. "This is it, folks," he whispered to his 10,000 viewers. "The big finale." But when Captain Davis reappeared, his demeanor was entirely unexpected. He walked past the first-class seats and approached Jasmine with the deep respect reserved for the airline's most valued customers. "Miss Robinson," he said gently, "your father's security team is here to escort you." First, she was led back into the first-class cabin. The words hung in the air. "Miss Robinson." Stephanie's triumphant smile wavered, but Jasmine's face lit up with pure relief. "Daddy sent security? That means everything's okay." The cabin door opened, and two men in impeccably tailored suits entered. This was not airport security. This was elite executive protection. The lead officer scanned the cabin, his eyes landing on Jasmine with immediate recognition. "Ms. Robinson," he said, his tone gentle, "your father is waiting in the VIP lounge. He was very concerned when he heard about the disturbance." The words hit the cabin like a shockwave. VIP lounge. "He wanted me to tell you that everything is going to be all right," the man continued, speaking only to Jasmine, "and that he's very proud of how you handled yourself." A real smile, bright and true, broke across Jasmine's face. "I knew Daddy would fix this." Lisa Patel's face went white. She knew these protocols. They were reserved for the highest echelons of power. The $1,500 in her pocket now felt like poison. Frank, the man who had lectured her on proper behavior, finally found his voice. "Who exactly is this child's father?" he demanded, his tone stripped of its earlier authority. Jasmine looked at him, confused by the sudden shift in the room. "Jonathan Robinson," she said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He owns an airline." The silence that followed was absolute. Derek Mitchell's phone nearly slipped from his trembling hands. "Wait," he stammered to his camera. "Jonathan Robinson, as in the CEO of Robinson Airlines?" Jasmine tilted her head. "You know my daddy?" she asked, genuinely pleased. Betty gasped. "She's the CEO's daughter." The color drained from Stephanie Blackwood's face. She had spent the flight bribing an employee to torment the boss's daughter. As the security team gathered Jasmine's things, Lisa Patel pulled the crumpled bills from her pocket, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, trying to push the money at Stephanie. "I didn't realize who. I should never have." But Jasmine's gaze was clear. "Realize what? That I was telling the truth?" Her innocent question underscored the cruelty of their calculations. Her identity should never have mattered. Sandra, the executive, was mentally replaying every condescending word she'd uttered to the CEO's child. Bradley stared in horror at his phone, realizing his mockery of airline royalty was now permanently recorded. Frank sat in stunned silence, a man who had tried to teach a lesson to the daughter of the man who owned the entire company. Desperate, Stephanie tried one last pathetic gambit. "We were just playing with you," she said weakly. But Jasmine's innocence was hardening into a dawning, painful understanding. She looked at the faces around her, no longer confused, but hurt. "You were mean to me because you thought my family was poor?" The question hung in the air, an indictment of them all. They hadn't tormented her because of anything she'd done. They had tormented her because they thought they could. They assumed she was powerless. They were wrong. There was no anger in her eyes, no flicker of a desire for revenge. There was, instead, something far more powerful, something utterly devastating: disappointment. On that day, she had learned a terrible truth about the world, a truth her parents had carefully shielded her from for 16 years. She had discovered that adults could be cruel for no reason beyond prejudice, that kindness was not a universal language, and that safety was never a guarantee. But she had also learned something else. She had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, that her father's love could reach her even in the darkest of moments, and that truth and justice, though they might travel a slow road, would always arrive at their destination. As she walked off that plane, Jasmine Robinson was no longer the sheltered, innocent child who had boarded in Connecticut. She was someone who had been tested by cruelty and had emerged with her dignity intact, someone who had faced hatred and responded with grace. Behind her, she left a cabin full of adults who were about to discover that actions have consequences, that their cruelty had been witnessed and recorded, and that justice was about to be served by someone with the power to ensure it was both swift and complete. The true reckoning was just beginning. As the security team gently guided Jasmine through the first-class cabin toward the exit, her innocent voice carried one last question that would haunt every passenger who heard it. "Will those people be in trouble?" she asked the security chief, looking back at the adults who had tormented her. There was no vindictiveness in her tone, only genuine concern. Even after the psychological torture, after the deliberate cruelty, Jasmine's first thought was not of revenge, but of the welfare of the very people who had tried to shatter her spirit. The purity of that concern, the complete absence of malice, served as the final damning indictment of every adult who had participated in her suffering. Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell's phone was vibrating uncontrollably, a cascade of notifications from a live stream that had exploded across social media. What he had intended as entertaining content at a teenager's expense had become a viral sensation, but not in the way he had hoped. The video was being shared with captions like, "We tortured the CEO's daughter," and "Watch adults bully a child for an hour." The comments section had morphed into a digital courtroom where thousands of viewers expressed their fury. Corporate investigators, airline executives, and legal teams were already downloading the footage, preserving the evidence for what would become one of the most expensive discrimination cases in aviation history. Derek's follower count was indeed exploding, but for all the wrong reasons. He was no longer an entertainer. He was infamous, the man who had broadcast the systematic abuse of a child for profit. Lisa Patel, the flight attendant, was facing the immediate end of her career. Word had already reached the airline's management about her accepting bribes to discriminate against a passenger. The fact that the passenger was the CEO's daughter made her actions not just unethical, but catastrophically foolish. Her supervisor was on the phone, informing her that her employment was terminated, effective immediately, and that she would be escorted from the aircraft by airport security. But the consequences spread far beyond Lisa. Every passenger who had joined in Jasmine's torment was being permanently flagged in the airline's global system. Stephanie Blackwood, Sandra, Frank and Betty, Bradley, and Derek Mitchell would find themselves banned from flying with any airline in the Robinson network, a web that included partnerships with dozens of carriers worldwide. Their names were being entered into databases that would follow them for the rest of their lives. As Jasmine walked away from the nightmare, she turned to the security chief one more time. Her request revealed the remarkable character her parents had instilled in her. "I don't want them to get fired or lose their jobs," she said softly. "They seemed so sad and angry about something else. Maybe they just need help." The security chief looked down at this extraordinary young woman, his expression a mixture of amazement and profound respect. After everything she had endured, she was advocating for their welfare. It was a level of compassion and maturity most adults never achieve, displayed by someone who was still, by law, a child. As they moved through the airport toward the VIP lounge, Jasmine's eyes suddenly lit up. She saw a familiar figure waiting for her. Jonathan Robinson stood near the entrance to the executive area, and though he was one of the most powerful men in the industry, in that moment, he was simply a father, anxiously waiting for his daughter. "Daddy!" Jasmine cried out, breaking away from the security team and running straight into his arms. The relief and joy in her voice echoed through the terminal as she finally, truly felt safe again. Jonathan Robinson was a man who commanded boardrooms filled with billionaires and made decisions that affected millions. But as he held his daughter, feeling her tears of relief soak into the fabric of his expensive suit, none of that mattered. He was just a father whose child had been hurt, and the pain in his heart was plain for all to see. "People were so mean to me, Daddy," Jasmine sobbed into his chest. "I don't understand why. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just sitting in my seat." Jonathan's jaw tightened as he held her closer, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I'm so sorry, Princess," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No child should ever have to go through what you went through today." In the quiet of the lounge, Jasmine pulled back, her face a mask of earnest confusion. "They thought we were poor, Daddy. Is being poor bad? Are poor people not allowed to fly in nice seats?" The question revealed the profound depth of her innocence, a testament to how well her parents had shielded her from the ugliness of prejudice. She genuinely could not grasp the idea that someone's wealth could be used to justify treating them as less than human. Jonathan knelt to meet her gaze, choosing his words with the care of a parent navigating a minefield. "No, baby," he said gently. "Being poor isn't bad. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter how much money they have. But some people forget that, and they use it as an excuse to be cruel." Jasmine processed this, her expression serious. Then, true to her nature, her thoughts turned to others. The flight attendant who took the money, she seemed like she really needed it. Can we help her find another job? Maybe she was just scared about paying her bills. Jonathan looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Even after being betrayed by Lisa Patel, Jasmine's first impulse was to understand and forgive. It was a level of compassion that left him breathless. In the days that followed, he had conversations with his daughter that he had hoped to delay for years. He explained prejudice and discrimination, helping her understand that the cruelty she had faced was not random, but rooted in the shallow assumptions people had made about her appearance. "So they were mean to me because of how I look?" she asked, her young mind grappling with a concept that confounds many adults. "Some people make wrong assumptions based on things like skin color or the clothes someone is wearing," Jonathan explained. "They don't take the time to know the person inside." Jasmine's response was immediate and indignant, delivered with the moral clarity only a child possesses. "That's not fair. I was just being myself." These conversations blossomed into deeper discussions about privilege, kindness, and the responsibility that comes with influence. He helped her see that while she couldn't control how others behaved, she could always control her own actions, and that their family's wealth was a tool that should be used to help, not to harm. "I want to travel with you more," Jasmine told him one evening. "I want to see how other people live and learn how to help them. I don't want to be sheltered anymore if it means I don't understand the world." Jonathan realized that from this traumatic ordeal, his daughter had gained something invaluable. She had lost a measure of her innocence, but in its place, she had found wisdom, empathy, and a passion for social justice that would define the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the consequences for the other passengers were swift and severe. Stephanie Blackwood's reputation was shattered. Her own family publicly distanced themselves from her actions. Her country club revoked her membership, her charity boards demanded her resignation, and her social circle vanished. The woman who built her identity on the superiority of old money learned that privilege is a poor shield against public disgrace. Sandra, the corporate executive, was terminated from her position. Her company, a partner of Robinson Airlines, could not afford the association. Her career was effectively over. Frank and Betty, the elderly couple, found their golden years of comfortable travel had come to an abrupt end, replaced by the humiliation of being recognized and asked to leave airports. Bradley, the trust fund kid, discovered that inherited wealth could not buy back a reputation destroyed by viral infamy. But perhaps the most telling outcome was that of Lisa Patel. Moved by his daughter's compassion, Jonathan arranged for the former flight attendant to receive job placement assistance and financial counseling. It was an act of grace that Lisa would never forget, a powerful lesson for Jasmine on the difference between justice and revenge. 6 months later, Jonathan Robinson implemented a comprehensive sensitivity training program across his entire airline network. Developed with civil rights experts, it became the new industry standard. Jasmine, for her part, began volunteering at a local community center, using her own experience to connect with children who had faced bullying and discrimination. The family even changed how they traveled, often flying in different classes so Jasmine could interact with people from all walks of life. The story of Jasmine Robinson's flight became more than a tale of comeuppance. It became a lesson in character, compassion, and the choice between using power to hurt or to heal. And around the world, people began to ask themselves a simple but profound question. When faced with a choice between cruelty and kindness, which would I choose? Jasmine Robinson had chosen kindness, and that choice had changed everything. If you enjoyed this story, like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.